In the previous lecture, we basically discussed what are the three components of research and why research is simple, which does not mean easy, which is simple like problems, the problem that you need to solve, which means the only way to assess a problem and that the problem is a real problem, namely that the problem is something that you do not know how to solve, is to do the state of the art. Then the second one here is the solution space, and which is given the problem, namely something that we do not know how to do, how we solve it. And then associated to the solution, there is a notion of evaluation. All of you in your research ever, in all your research, but even any time you do anything, you solve problems, you have to be very clear, you have to have a methodology for assessing that what you call the solution is a real solution. And this is why the evaluation is so important. And the evaluation clearly must be able to be repeatable, which means other people can do it. I mean, otherwise you just convince yourself of your solution. And also this means that the solution should be clearly mapped one-to-one with the problem, which requires that the problem is precise enough in the specification. Because if the problem is not specified well enough, then the solution is not clear it is a solution. And this, by the way, is a typical problem that you have in the real world when you develop software for third parties. And the third part is impact. In the world, there are many more things that we do not know how to do, with respect to the ones we want to do. But also there are many things we want to do and many things we don't care about doing. Impact is exactly the why question. Why should I do it? If problem is a what question, what is not I'm not unable to do. If the solution is how I'm going to solve it, how I'm going to fix the problem, the impact is a why question. Why should I do it? So all of this is what we said last time, which basically puts pretty much everything in context. But now the question becomes the next step. And the next step is really, okay, we want to do this, and how we go ahead in research. I took I think we all have this idea and our personal idea, but I think that this piece of text that I found many years ago from Steve Hawking, I think makes it up, makes it very clear. So let me just read it. Ever since the dawn of civilization, people have not been content to see events as unconnected and inexplicable. They've craved an understanding of the underlying order in the world. Humanity's deepest desire for knowledge is justification enough for our continuing quest. So the fundamental start of research is that we need to know that we don't know something. If you think the problem statement is something that we don't know how to do. But if you think about it, most of us don't care about what we don't know how to do. They are very happy with what they do. And sometimes, even if they don't know how to do things, they think they're doing very well. And maybe this is right. I mean, I know how to write a car even if I do not know how to drive a Ferrari. I know how to drive a car, even if I don't know how to drive in Formula One. This is the presentation. Now, this is what I wrote before. I'm sure what I read before, and I'm sure that you're reading now. And so this is the bottom line. So you see, in the first question you have to ask is really, what is it that you don't know that you want to know? And clearly, this happens to your life, but in research, applies to humanity. So if you really want to do a research, you need to ask a question that nobody has answered before. And this is the what issue, as I said. And then the why issue, that is a good question. This is what is impact, what makes a difference. But this is the fundamental basis of research. Realize there is something that we don't know, and based on that, try to get to know it or to solve it. There are many notions of know that I'm not going to get into details now, but it's the bottom line of our research. And by the way, let me also say that asking the question what you don't know is by far the hard questions, and this is also why the first year is by far the worst year in the PhD, because you really have to get to understand this fact that you have to start from the problem. As I said already in the previous lecture, most people and most PhD students, when they start, they concentrate on solutions. Maybe they know how to do everything magically, but they don't know why they do it or what it's useful for. And I think these thanks from Steve Hawkins gives precise statement. But now, if you get into the details, then how do we make this concrete? I think that what are we doing in science and engineering? I think there are four fundamental issues that we need to do. And if you think of your research, pretty much, I'm not pretending here to be complete, but pretty much what you do in research does rotate, is related to one of these issues that you have to do when you do research in science and engineering. First of all, creative function, describe plus explain. Creation of the basis for statement about objects, their relationship as well as explanation. Someone that I trust a lot, and I think he was totally right, once wrote in a book that most people confuse the fact that you're used to see something. You have seen something very many times, and the fact that you understand why it works, why it happens. Right? We are used to the word, but we have no idea how the word works. So the creative function is actually the first step, which is something primitive, very simple, and then the issue is you decompose that problem in sub-problems. We give it a structure, in some architecture, some components, and then by building these kind of more primitive definitions, you show that these initially primitive phenomenon, which you did not know how to explain, then you can actually explain it. So, for instance, the law of physics explain why the famous apple fell on Earth, because in front of Newton, because he came out with the definition of gravitational force and weight and so on. This creative function, the science of definitions, and the science and the engineering also of definitions and consequences. People call them theorems sometimes. And it is like in our field of AI is what we do in KR, what we do in modeling, which is we have a phenomenon and we try to explain it. And we explain it by giving the atomic elements, by putting together these definitions, we're actually able to create some theorems, some consequences that are arguably correct according to the laws of thought, that actually if you look at the results and look at the reality, you can actually see that it works. The critical function is, Popper was a famous philosopher, and he came up with this notion of falsificationism, which is, of course, we do the creative function, which is, of course, we build theories of the word, but of course, and I say of course, even if it's not so obvious, but you may want to think about this, no matter how good the theory is, this theory will be incomplete, meaning that it will not cover all the cases of reality. And Popper said that the way to proceed, at least one way to proceed, is to come up with a current theory, come up with a counterexample, and show that the counterexample, show by that the previous theory was wrong. Notice that, as Google says, we sit on the shoulders of the giants. So the fact that the first theory was wrong does not mean that, first of all, was wrong is not the correct term. You should say the fact that the previous theory did not explain everything doesn't mean it was bad. It just means that we need to extend the theory. It means that previous theory did not cover all the cases. And so, for instance, people came up in physics. We do physics because I assume all of you know it. Classical theory was later on kind of shown to be wrong under certain assumptions by quantum mechanics. Does it mean that classical physics is bad? No, of course not. We still use it. We do know that, however, that when we go into under certain conditions, like small dimensions and so on, classical physics doesn't work anymore. So we have to do something else. So coming up with quantum mechanics in physics did not destroy the need of classical physics, that in fact we use all the time. Of course, the critical function can be even more radical. I mean, sometimes you can actually come with a new theory which completely destroys the previous theories. So like the famous one in the history of humanity is when Kepler said, oh, by the way, it's not the sun rotating around the Earth, but it is actually vice versa. That was really more not an incremental update, it was a major shift. And this stuff sometimes happens. But again, this is all about critical function. It's about this issue of really improving on what you're doing. And that really has to do with a lot with knowing what you don't know. I mean, knowing, you see, in research, you have only to know what is a boundary between what you know and what you don't know. And it is exactly there when you want to do research that you have to find your own place for improving the state of the art in the world knowledge. It can be like incremental, it can be disruptive, doesn't matter. This is up to you. It's up to your style, your taste, whatever, but that's okay. Predictive function, of course, predictive function. Predictive function is the next step. We have a theory. The theory somehow simulates under certain conditions reality, the evolution of reality, and therefore you can make predictions. This is exactly what in KR, noise representation, people do with theorems. By far, in what is done now in machine learning. Machine learning is, in AI, in our field, computer science, the discipline where the notion of prediction is really pushed a lot, and which actually applied as a way for the machine to be predictive what is happens around it in the world. And then the last point, which is not I added myself, I got the first three by a book. The last one is my own take on this, which is not good enough. I think that there is something else which is not good enough to me only to do science, but also you need to do engineering. See, science is about getting to know things. Engineering is about how to build stuff. And from my point of view, the only way to understand something, namely to do science, is to rebuild it. Because if you build something which actually does or behaves similar to what nature does in its various aspects, then you really think you really have understood something. But then, of course, engineering is a good motivation towards science, but it's also very good because, I mean, all innovation, people talk about innovation. And when you get to know something, and if you're able to build something which exploited the new knowledge, then this creates economic value and can really build into economic growth. And so this construction function, in particular in our field, is a major issue. Just because computer science is predominantly, even if not only, engineering and engineering discipline. Then we move to research. So before we were talking about science, we're talking about engineering, and now we talk about research. Now, I want to say two things. So first of all, what is research and why we're doing it, and by then we'll also talk about innovation. Everybody now, at least in Europe, I would say worldwide, is talking about innovation. My question to you here is, what is the difference between research and innovation? What are you doing? Are you doing research? Are you doing innovation? What are you doing is relevant to innovation? And what is innovation, again, in relation to research? Are they the same thing or different? What makes research innovation related? What makes them different? To get into this discussion, which I think is fundamental, just because I see computer science as an engineering discipline, and I said that engineering is the best way to do research and to do science, but I also believe is also the only way to, in many ways, maybe not the only way, but most common way to do innovation. So let's go to research. So what is research? I said that before, right? If you think of Steve Hawking's claim there's something we don't know, we realize that we don't know it, and then we work and we come to know it, to come to a solution. Could be the solution. The solution could be a new explanation for that thing we don't know. Could be a new piece of hardware or software or a bridge to solving something in engineering. And this is actually the new knowledge, right? So really research is creating something that you don't know. So before you knew nothing or very little about the world, now you do some research, you keep knowing nothing and very little about the world, but at least you know a little bit more. And if you answer well your why question, the little more that you know about the world is actually the important bit, which can actually, make you feel better, make you understand better, because they understand the important part of reality, or makes you economically better because it allows you to build things that you could not build before. So this issue of research as new knowledge is really crucial. Now, people usually distinguish between basic research and applied research. And people, it's something that scientists like mathematics and some engineers like, which is like basic research is about fundamental properties of objects, their relationship and their behavior. Usually it's theoretical research like theoretical physics, then there are experimental research evaluating, and there is applied research, which is how we think about this usefulness of these objects and their behavior, and maybe to lead into improving technology. So roughly speaking, some people would argue that basic research is done by scientists like applied research done more by engineers or computer scientists and so on and so forth. And this, I think, is pretty much common understanding, but then, of course, I totally disagree with this. I don't think so. Sometimes you talk to some mathematicians, you ask them, why do you do this research? I was lucky to know some pretty famous mathematicians, and if you ask them, even the most theoretical ones, they always have a precise something in mind. They always have a goal. Some people talk about curiosity research, curiosity-driven research. Well, I don't know, some people do like this, but I also know that there are some mathematicians and some physicists who really do work based on, because they have a problem to solve, really, which has impact. And at the same way, ultimately, as an engineer, even doing engineering, you can really solve problems to have a major theoretical answer. So in all of these, why I'm saying all of this, because whether basic research, applied research is a good distinction, doesn't really matter. The fundamental question to you here is what you want to do, what you're going to do. And I do know that now you're at the beginning of your PhD, so you have pretty much, most of you don't have a clear idea about this, but it's exactly why you're doing this class, and this is why you're doing a PhD. The learning how to do research is somewhat a long path. And so these are the questions that we have to train yourself in this class, and you're qualifying, your research is going to be the first step in this direction. So, and this is why I want to talk about innovation now. So, because I really thought it would be useful for you also, given that you're doing a PhD in computer science. So if research is about discovering new knowledge, namely, this means research is about getting to know what you don't know. Innovation is about discovering new ways of doing things. In other words, innovation is about getting to know how to do new things. So to do innovation, you not only need to know more, you also need to know how to put it in practice. Could be invent the plane, could be inventing the car, the engine for cars, could be inventing whatever you want, the computer, but at the key point. And this is why innovation is very, very hard, much harder than the research. Because you see, if when you do research, you're really dealing with the problem, getting to know things you don't know. When you do innovation, not only have to do that, But then you have to build something which a solution that can actually work in practice to do something that you did not know how to do before. And then you also need to convince people to how to use it. And that's really the hard part. It's really hard part once you have done the research, which is maybe you have built a wonderful new piece of hardware and software, but nobody uses it because for many reasons. So there is like in the old days of when it was young in TV, right, when in color TV was invented, there were two models, two types of color TV. One was called PAL and second, I don't remember which one. And one was clearly better than the other. But the other one, for which reason? Not for technological reason. The other solution was much better. I don't know why the other one won. I was too young, so I have no idea, but this is a fact. This happens all the time. My other usual argument in this is that, for instance, my usual, as an example of success story is like the iPhone, right? I mean, what's interesting, if you think of the iPhone is everything but not a phone. It's a computer, it's a portable computer. But the idea that by calling them a phone, people kind of make it easier for people to think. So people actually buy a phone. They think they buy a phone, and then once Apple and Android and everybody like Google got the phone in the hand of people, then they say, okay, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. So this is what they call the social metaphor. I mean, it's not good enough to make a good phone. You have also to sell it. You have to really convince people how to use it. And that's a very major issue. This is actually what basically makes most attempts to build successful companies, startups, technology-driven startups fail. So, and the same is like with Windows. I mean, if you think about it, the main problem when I was young, and now you're too young, but when Microsoft sold the PC, they called this operating system Office. Office, why? Windows was telling you. Microsoft was telling you, I'm selling you a new typewriter. Well, they sold you the typewriter, and then when you say, oh, they sell you the typewriter, they sold you Word and Excel and PowerPoint, and then they said, oh, look here, you can also do this. Oh, by the way, you can also try the browser. And they embedded the browser into the operating system, with those killing the early like browsing companies and so on and so forth. These are just examples, and pretty much they're nothing new and nothing. But the key point I'm saying that there is science and engineering, first dimension. Then there is a second dimension, which is research, and then there is innovation. Why all of these, based on the first lecture was talking on problem solution and impact, is because pretty much depending on where your topic of PhD is, your research is going to be, you're going to be positioned in different layers between science and engineering and research and innovation. Of course, these distinctions are not clear. There is a continuum. And I want to just make a statement on this, which is when I make a proposal for a topic to a PhD student, usually I give them a general area, then I see how they interact, how they react, where people perform better, where there are more difficulties. And usually then I try to figure out a good PhD topic, because at the beginning, in my opinion, the advisor has to take the responsibility, which best fits their interest and background. And then this kind of choice keeps moving on until the student actually takes on her or his own PhD topic. Namely, which is I can only propose to you, but ultimately I can only make proposal. Ultimately, it's only you who can make the final decision. And you make the final decision, I mean, in the sense that really giving the topic your own style only in time. this is actually the main topic of the first year, as I'll say tomorrow in the next presentation. The first year is only for me really helping you understanding what is the best way for you to do the PhD, which is the best way to fit your interests, your skills, and so on and so forth. And this is why, as I said before, the first year is by far the hardest, because it's really complicated, and each different PhD student is a different story. But I'm saying all of this because this is really important that you become aware of this phenomenon, because the more you become aware, the more you understand that the PhD is different from some of you thought when you started, very, very different from the master thesis. And of course, you see the progress of students, because the more the student progresses well, the more it becomes autonomous. The more the student becomes autonomous, that means the more he comes to my office and said, I have this idea. The more ideas you have, the better. The more constructive, the more critical also are, the better. This is exactly what you need to do. Of course, always with the risk of being arrogant, meaning by this of overestimating your ability, which is always for all of us, including me, the risk for everybody doing research. But all of this to say that this is really the foundations of how to do research, and this is going to be the foundations of the lecture that I'm going to do next time, which is how to do a PhD. I mean, in this first year, you really have to position yourself, as I said, in the space of problem solution, impact, number one, science and engineering, research, innovation. And the more you become aware of this, the more you help me in helping you to define and to go fast in your PhD. And of course, the measure of success in all of these, I'm going to say in a few minutes, is going to be publications, which is how the community is accepting your work. Not only publication, but it's also platforms, it's also innovation, it's also open source, depending on the style. We as a group, we are really, I would say, pretty strong compared to other groups in the innovation aspects. And by the way, this is something that you also get when you come to work with me. A lot of groups really concentrate, even DZ, concentrate on research only. To me, that's not good enough. I want to do also engineering, also do innovation. And this is what you get when you work with me. So at different levels, all of you will have to do with this to deal with this in your PhD. And by the same time, I think it is my style. I can only try to teach what I understand better. But I also think I'm really convinced that this is good for you. There is already evidence that concentrating on papers only is not the way to do it. I mean, top places now, citations and publication, not the only way. It's not the main way of selecting people. Ultimately, what matters is really how much you learn in your PhD. Anyway, so this is about it. Now, all of this is a theory. And now we have to go to the practice. So one thing that is going to be what I call the community of scientists. So pretty much when you join your PhD, you join with this group, basically you join a community of scientists. I mean, like, you have to understand there are millions of researchers and scientists in the world. And by coming and working with me, you just make a choice. And pretty much you go or you accept to participate in the community of scientists to which I belong, because pretty much, as I said before, that even if ultimately in long term you're going to build your own style, your own profile, as we all did, becoming older and older, then at the beginning, pretty much you sit on the shoulders of the giants. Pretty much it is your advisor who actually helps you in defining things. Now, the key point of research is that research, having said everything that I said before, research is really a social phenomenon. I mean, like, you come up with some research, some results, but if you're not able to make other people accept your result, which is why the process of writing papers, then what you understand is irrelevant from the point of view of science. And even if if you write a paper, if people don't read your paper, then it still is relevant. And I have this terminology which I like a lot, which I would argue that most papers today are write-only papers. By write-only papers, I mean papers that are written only and nobody reads them. This kind of a consequence, a negative consequence of the blow-up of too many publications, too many in these days. So you like to write a paper. First of all, you like to write a paper. Number two, you like people to read it. And then I would like people to cite it. But then again, people just exaggerate in the citation aspect. That citation is something. But again, if you think of the example of the iPhone not being a phone, I mean, if you write what people expect, if you write something that people understand, easier to understand, then people will more easily cite it. This is why when we go to the paper writing, I spend a lot of time in make clear with your audience. We talk more about this. But besides all the distortions or positive effects of being aware of this, I think the key point that you have to understand in the first year is, what is your community of scientists? What is a community you participate to, you're involved in? Each of you as a community participate to a community. So the question for you is, which community? You do need to understand this. This is your homework for all of you, because only by understanding this, you can really be able to talk to them, to the people of your community, right? Like at home, you have the community of your friends, and then you have the community of scientists. Of course, all of these you learn more or less implicitly by the process, as you'll find out, but in the next slides. But if you use this opportunity to spend some time in the next week, like to understand more precisely, each of you, this homework for you, what is your reference community, and that tell you in a second what is your reference community, how to do it, then I think this will elaborate, will allow you to elaborate, to make a much faster in exploiting your results. Remember, I told you, as is written here, the goal of science is to achieve the consensus over the widest possible field, which means not only good enough to produce a result, but you also do need to figure out people who can read and use the result. And so the more, the faster, the sooner you know your reference community, the better. How do we do? What is a reference community? There are a lot of constraints. This slide, I have nothing to say. Is really saying that a lot of constraints like education, tradition, I mean, even nationality, like there are very interesting situations of community being very close. For instance, the French community, the Japanese community is a rather close research community compared to the Italian or the Chinese, to do similar ones. The Americans very open. They, of course, they wanted that this, they've succeeded so far in being kind of leaders and so on. Europe is open and so on. In general, with like France being a bit more closed, but they are still very open. Of course, they're very good. I'm not here. It's not an issue of quality. It's really more like of an attitude. What I'm saying that culture does play a role, because of course it is people who do really research ultimately, and therefore people, the culture plays a role in this. So now, how do this community of cognitive? There are three things. What are the instruments by which the community of scientists gets enabled? They are invisible colleges, peer reviews, and reward system. Let me just go through all them one by one. And invisible college. So what is invisible college? It's just a set of communication networks. So any community is constructed around a set of journals or conferences. So there's the KR community, there's a deep learning community, there's a machine learning community, slightly different. There is the modeling community, there is the pervasive computer system community, there's the AI community, which is bigger than the others. There's a natural language community, computer vision community, all of these communities. And most of you, at least in my group, but in general, usually you participate to more than one community. Why? Because these communities intersect. So question number you, for each of you, for all of you, you must understand what are the top journals, the top conferences, and the top even projects and under which you subscribe. Which means that this is homework for you. You should look around. I actually published the next sheet somewhere with a list of conferences, which I think is available to everybody. So each of you, you should really look at those journals and conferences. And of course, not only those, but you have to really understand what they are. Why? Because each community has a different perception of the problem. Each community has a different perception of the solution. Each community has a different perception of evaluation. Each community has its own take on how to do research. So in theoretical, in logic, you do validation by proving theorems. In machine learning, you have to use certain data sets. In KR, you have to do case studies example. Each of them. How do you know them? Of course, I talk to you as being your advisor and being kind of the senior person, and this helps you, but you have to do it the work yourself. You just have to, as I say in the next lecture, you have to really learn by yourself to do it yourself. This is something you have to do. So you have to, how you do this? You have to spend a fair amount of time every month, every week, like sometime every week, looking at the top journals in your community, and maybe not even the top journals, maybe not even the top conferences. A lot of people have what people have done. And by the way, usually you have to soon come to like the reference 10, 20, no more than 30 groups in the world. Because even within NLP or any other area like computer vision, there are certain groups which are closer to you. You must become aware of all the groups which are closer to you. You must read their papers. You must be up to date with them. Not only that, when you go to a conference, you must go to conference to talk to them. As I keep saying, people do not cite papers. People cite people. I know that with COVID now the situation is tough, but you have to learn how to engage in scientific discussion with other groups. As simple as that. So these becoming part of the Invisible College, not only by writing papers, by giving presentations. Here, we are we are an Invisible College at No Dive, which has participated to a lot of Invisible Colleges, which are actually pretty wide open. But then you have to give a talk to us. You have to learn how to engage in discussion with us. Then you have to go to a conference, but the conference is not good enough. You have to go to a workshop. You have to go to any place. Science is all about interaction and social construction of agreement. What are the scientific results? So this issue of participating and being visible in your invisible colleges is really fundamental, and it's something that at the beginning people do not understand, and this is exactly why, in particular, not the first year, because the first year, I think, as I say later to next lecture, you have to spend some time in understanding what the invisible colleges are, but the second, third, fourth year, you have to do it. I mean, as I said, let me repeat, people cite people, they don't cite papers. So of course, as long as my name is first or last or somewhere in your papers, you do have a competitive advantage. There's also a disadvantage where people maybe don't like me, but sooner or later you have to write your papers yourself. And you have to build on your own credibility, right? As I said, science is very important. It's a very clean process. But you do have to engage in scientific discussion. This is why peer review is fundamental. In the same way as the invisible colleges are important, and peer review is a way to validate the process. And by the way, it may happen, and remember that in this perspective, you are as good as I am. I'm only older, which is, I'm not sure is a feature. So it's perfectly fine for you to reject a paper of mine. There's nothing, and I need to accept this. Of course, then I can claim you're not a good reviewer. This is what people are doing now in conferences and so on and so forth. But the point is that when you do a PhD, you engage in the peer review, and also reviewing becomes very important. Not only you must be skillful, be skillful in doing the work, but you must be able to become skillful in understanding what people have done fully, and also finding counterexamples. Because even if I get a rejection, but this rejection gives me good feedback, I'm happy. What is not acceptable is to get a bad rejection with no good motivations, in which case I complain. But if you see science as the joint effort, the social effort to really increase research as a social effort of increasing knowledge, then peer review and even rejection is something positive. Of course, you do want some acceptance once in a while, but that's part of the game. And the last part is the reward system. Of course, why all of this? The reward system is what you get back. I mean, first of all, you get the title. And the title, what is like, people get to know. You go to the conferences. I mean, I have people with friends of mine that I met them in 1991 doing my PhD, just after my PhD. And it's amazing because we meet every year at conferences. Too bad I've not met now for 2 years. But the people you keep seeing for an entire life, just at conferences, and they know you, and they read your paper, and they give you feedback. And then, if you're visible and strong, you go one level up. Then you become invited talk. I mean, invited talks usually are given by recognizable people. So first, you have to be known and published. Then you're invited to give invited talks. Then one level up, they give you the charge of organizing a conference. Why organizing a conference is fundamental? Because if I am the program chair, pretty much for that conference, I decide what a conference is going to do for the next year. I'm choosing the conference. I'm choosing the reviewers. I'm choosing the topics. I'm choosing pretty much everything. The power of the program chair in terms of influence of what the research is huge. And of course, all of them do it properly. They are aware of this. By even being given the program is an amazing, even for the little workshop, is an amazing experience because you start seeing what it means to do research. And then, of course, you get prizes and whatever. And then ultimately, later on, sooner or later, at the end of the PhD, also your salary, the hiring person, the hiring institution is going to be a function of this. So basically, the reward system is that once you learn how to do research and innovation, then in particular in this society, which is very research innovation driven, first you have to do it, and then people are going to offer you jobs as a function of whether you succeeded. Now, here, where are you? Up to you. Not everybody needs to become a program chair. Actually, program chairs are a very small minority. And some of you, maybe they don't even care. Maybe you do something else. All of these, I'm not telling you, and by the way, because I think it would be wrong to push you for performance, do the best, do the best. No, that's the wrong way to do it. But the point is that I'm just giving you the way to think about this in the way so that you position yourself in days of your interest and also to become aware of the process within which you are. You are a PhD student, and therefore you're at the beginning of this process, and it's important that you understand these dimensions. So the take-home message of this is, the second part of this lecture is, you now need to start thinking, maybe you've already done, some of you, what is your community reference? What are the top places and the people you can work more closely? How important it is to become part of an active member of the community, and using conferences and reviewers and peer reviewers as a way to do it, with the ultimate goal really to get rewarded by the community itself and then by the outside society. Now, I'm going to do a little bit more, which is with this community. I'm going to go pretty fast. You see, as I said, the second argument. So we said there is at the beginning an abstract notion, which is like research and innovation. Then we said there are community, but the community have norms. And in general, as I said, the scientific community, with all the twists and the personalization due to culture, personality, and so on, is a very clean community, much better than most others. Just because I think of the high goal, if you want to do research, at least in principle, you do research for the interest of the community, of humanity. And so the fundamental point here is that you have the scientific norms. Here we list some: community, universalism, disinterestedness, originality, skepticism. Communism, I'm going to go through them relatively fast. Communism, the science is open. The results of science is open. This is why right now, like Europe has started a huge a huge process in open science here. I think definitely Europe is #1 in this in the world. They start a huge money on open new project in open science. Right now in Europe, we cannot do project, research project. We cannot get research money if the results are not open, available to everybody. And notice that there is a fundamental difference between research and innovation. Research is open, innovation results are closed. This is why people invented patents, people invented IPRs. And this is a fundamental difference between science and innovation. Innovation, and there is like now for COVID, the big pharma, whatever, there's a big issue when you develop IPR, like a new vaccines, whatever you do about that. There's a lot of issues here, but whether innovation should be open or closed, but for sure, science should be open. So all the research you do has to be available. Then number 2, universalism. A friend of mine who's actually now dean of Oxford computer science department once told me, you are always as good as your last paper. He's a pretty famous guy, but he said, look, see, it doesn't matter how well you have done. Your measure to the community is how good your paper is. So that's the second one. The third one is really when you do it, just because of universalism of science, when you do it for the interest of community, of the community. And of course, and some of you will go to work for industry, it is a different game. But the industry, of course, does research with innovation in mind, which is the different game from the game that you're playing during the PhD. And by the way, I'm not saying that is wrong. I mean, that's perfectly fine. Then, as I said, there are a lot of issues around the issue of how open innovation is. But the point here is that there's a clear distinction between research, which is how to know more stuff, and innovation, which is about how to know how to do things. Is that, as I said, research is open and innovation not necessarily. Then there are people like people who made the entire operating system open, like Linux and so on. So there are people even that argue that innovation will be free, but that could be debatable. It is a source of debate, but this debate does not exist for science. And of course, you have to be original. Original, that's easy. This is why we do the state of the art. That's easy. Now, the key point that, as I told you in the last presentation, you make a presentation and we set up a set of people to shoot you down. So again, as I said to you last time, if you do a presentation, people should come to you and try to really find counter arguments in your presentation, but not because in a negative, in a constructive way. And this is exactly what's going to be useful for you when you go around and give a talk. I mean, being shot down in the group is much better than to be shot down in the conference or in a journal review and so on. So this issue, and if you think about it, there is no other way of doing this. Since none of us is available the final truth, the only way that we as a community of science have to debug ourselves is by really debugging ourselves, one another, in particular the ones with the most competence. And to close, the last point, by the way, if we have these norms, this means that in science you're not allowed to do misconduct. This is really fundamental. I just wrote here some example. I'm not gonna say much, but like scientific commandments, it was written in 1979 by Hans Mohr. Be honest, never manipulate data, be precise, be fair with regard to priority and ideas, be without bias with regard to the data and ideas of your rival. Do not make compromise in trying to solve the problem. Now, let me say I want to mention 2 points here. So first of all, the bias with respect to the others is not only with respect to the rival, also with your friend. So the negative bias, which is you reject the paper of another person, or like positive bias, you accept the paper of a person you know. So both of them are bad, and both of them in principle are easy to argue, but like research methodology, in principle, all of this is easy. In practice, it's very complicated. So how do people do this? Double blind reviews. is what people, when I was young, there was no double-blind reviews. We started it like 20 years, 15 years, in 2010, 10 years ago. And I remember when I was involved in the big conference, how we discussed that. But there was no blind reviews. It was single blind, which meant in the early days, there were no blind, which is the reviewers were also known. Then there was blind, single blind. Now there is double blind. And now, if you have seen open review, it's a very new way by which people, everything becomes visible. You can look at like ACL, ESWC, a lot of conferences really going to open review, give a look how people do reviews, which is very important. This number one, which is really how to avoid misconduct in science. Then there is also never manipulate data, right? Here there are a lot of histories. For instance, and now let me complain a bit about machine learning. Like, as you know, this one of my favorite arguments. Like a year ago, there was a very nice paper by a scientist, which was somewhere, I don't know whether it was published in the New Yorker or somewhere, where, the fundamental issue in data, that data should be replicable. That's the only way by which I said that's a solution to the solution. And I think it was a woman. This woman took like 5 top results in machine learning, deep learning, and tried to replicate them, and she failed to replicate all of them. And she gave a bunch of talks around, and that had a huge impact. And in fact, now, because of course, I mean, some of this happens because maybe, I'm not saying there is kind of people behave that on purpose, maybe some, but I would say that I would argue that most people don't do that on purpose. And in fact, now, if you submit the paper to machine learning, even Europe, all of them, the issue of replicability is huge, right? So all of this because really in science, misconduct is very bad. So I gave you one example, which is never manipulate data. But another example is fraud, which is you make up data results, you change the data results. I mean, and you don't want to do it. Even if it's minor, don't do it. It's really, I mean, also because there is nothing as bad as being caught in doing fraud in our community. Our community on this is very negative. So the norms that I said before really are embedded in the way we do research, in the way we have to do PhD. So think about this. Plagiarism is very important. Plagiarism, you reuse people by others, result by others without saying it. Don't do it. Anytime, first of all, we have the mechanism, it's citations. Sometimes you can even reuse a picture, but if you reuse a picture, you say, this picture has been taken from this. Sometimes you can do a quote. I mean, remember that science is all about replicating and reusing results by others. So we sit in the shoulders of the giants. So reusing the results of the others, being reused by the others, is exactly what we want to do. At the same time, the foundational notion is that, first of all, as I said before, you have to produce good results. Number two, you have to give to the others what the others have done. If you're good, you don't need to do plagiarism. You do not need to claim yours the results by others. There's so much research to be done. One specific case is self-plagiarism. Self-plagiarism, when and some people do it. I would argue that in the old days, when I was young, I did some of it myself. I was very young before the PhD. You basically reuse some of your text. You publish multiple papers on the same topic. Again, the distinction, that's I don't think is a good idea, personally. Also because if you publish too many papers on the same topic, then the main message is distributed on too many papers and people do not understand. So my point of view for any topic, if it is an important topic, you need one paper. Maybe you have less papers in your CV, but those papers have more citations because they will have an impact. But again, this is my own style, and again, there is not a 0-1 solution, so different people will do the different things. So the bottom line here, whether that misconduct is very bad, plagiarism is very bad, and self-plagiarism, you have to play it carefully. It's nothing totally bad, but you have to be very careful. Conflict of interest, I read, is very important. When we do reviews, you have to cite that you submit papers, you have to submit that you don't have a conflict of interest. And as I said before, is another major example. Avoid that. Anytime you do a review, you declare that you have no conflict of interest in a positive sense, in a negative sense. Like, for instance, in certain conferences, there are some rules, like you cannot review the paper of a person with the same institution. You can review a paper by someone who wrote a paper together. There's a lot of syntactic rules that people have come up with it, because now the community of scientists become very huge. This society is becoming very research intensive and innovation intensive. So there's the community of researchers have grown. A lot of people are coming with rules, but ultimately it's really up to you to decide and do what is right for you. And then here, to close this presentation, which as usual lasted longer than I thought, than I was hoping for, is really some question of research practice. So let me read them. I'm not going to comment on them. Failing to retain research data for a reasonable period. This is to do with replicability. Maintaining inadequate research records. Failing replicability. Refusing to give peers access to research materials. Replicability. Failing replicability. Inappropriate statistics to enhance the significance of research findings. This is really fraud and data manipulation. Inadequately supervising research subordinates. This is bad practice on the supervisor. Misrepresenting speculations as fact. This is a hand waving. Releasing results without providing sufficient data. This means you don't know how to do research. This really means if you do this, it's really bad. This means that your advisor didn't teach you enough. Selective reporting of research. This is really data manipulation. Interference is very bad. It's like an unquestionable human practice before then research practice. Self-plagiarism is, I said, something that to some extent that you should avoid, even if sometimes it's even mandatory. Not mandatory, is really useful. Again, as usual, there is a balance to do. And if you, as I said, if you have to do research, if you know how to do research, it's really useless. So this is self-plagiarism. I think this is the last slide. So with today, I really finished the foundations of how to do research, and next time we're going to talk how to do a PhD. I added this lecture because I mean, I felt the need of putting how to do a PhD in the perspective of how to do research, and I do hope that with this presentation I achieve this goal. With this, we are done. Thank you very much.